Good evening, guys. This is Chris Frosin, and today I'm going to look at some edits, some really basic edit tips, which are some of the things that I've learnt or picked up to edit your raw files in Lightroom today. So what we've got, if we'll just quickly run to Lightroom now, what we've got is I've made a selection, a quick collection of 4 photos. If you go to all your photos, look, it's really simple. If I want to add a photo to a quick collection, so let's add this photo of Chris. Actually, let's add the photo of his car, even better. So if we hit B, the B key on the keyboard, you'll see it's added it to the quick collection. If we go over to the quick collection now, there is the photo of his car. So that's a Nissan Bluebird, believe it or not. And then to remove it from the quick collection, just hit B. This is a nice easy way of getting a selection of photos together just to do some edits. So this is one of the ways I get my photos sorted out for when I'm doing edits of multiple photos, which might be across different imports. So what we're going to do, I'm going to just have a quick look at how we can very basically improve these photos, because what you'll see if we go into the develop module now, I've taken all these and reset them all back to how it was, and like Adam Lerner did in this week's Raw Edit, I think it was Raw Edit 63 on the Frono's photo forum, he's set, or I have set all my values to 0, because when you import them, Lightroom pops in some basics, so it adds in 5 blacks and 25 brightness or something like that. So all we've done is we've just taken all these back to 0, so I am seeing a completely raw file. This is out of the camera straight away. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run through, we're going to have a look at how the histogram relates to the photograph, and some of the things that we can do to make this photo just look a little bit less flat. So straight away, what we're going to look at in this photograph, it's always a good thing to look at exposure first. If we look up at the histogram, you'll see there's nothing down here in the black area. There's this histogram here, so the grey mountain that you can see, that is colour data. And then you can see the mountains behind, so that's the actual separate colour data. So there's the yellow colour data, there's the red colour data, there's the green that you can see spiking up there, which I imagine would be this bit down here. And that's how much data is throughout the dynamic range of the photograph. So there's nothing in the blacks, you can see there's no data in the blacks. There's quite a bit in the middle, which is all good, and then there's a little spike that you can see just on the right hand side on the right, and that's in the lights. And very simply, if we hover our mouse over here, you can see that red coming up. That is the highlight clipping, so that basically says that everything underneath there is pure white. Now that's not to worry, because I was shooting into a flash, so I knew I was going to get some highlight clipping on this anyway, so we don't need to worry about that. That's something, an anomaly on the histogram that we can ignore. So we need to worry about this central bit here. Now what we're going to do for this, well, there's enough room on here, on the black side here, to add in some black, so we're not going to touch the exposure on this one, that's all good. What we are going to do is add in a little bit of blacks, and you'll see that that just pulls this left hand side of the histogram down to the corner. Okay, keep adding those blacks in until we get it somewhere. This is just a nice simple way of looking at the histogram, editing a photo in relation to the histogram, and then actually having a look at the photograph and seeing what it's like. So doing this a technical way, because sometimes that helps to increase your knowledge, so that then eventually you'll be doing it by feel and you'll be going, oh, this needs just a little bit more contrast, and just moving the contrast up. But the histogram is always a good place to start. So brightness, I don't tend to touch brightness. Lightroom itself adds in 25 brightness. I don't tend to touch the brightness too much. I always like to do it in other ways, but we are going to do some contrast. Now as I move up the contrast, what it's going to do, going to take the black areas and it's going to take the highlight areas, it's going to add in some more details just to make those 2 areas pop and add some more contrast. That's what contrast is on a photo. So as we move that up, you'll see that histogram really bulking up. We don't want to allow this mounting here to come out and touch the edge, and you'll see it's just started to peak a little bit higher on the highlights as well. So we're just going to add a little bit of recovery just to pull that back. Don't want to go too far. Now clarity is a bit of personal preference. We don't want to add too much because it makes it go all grainy and horrible. We don't want to take it all the way off because it makes it go all dreamy. So my personal preference is just to add a little bit. So I generally veer around 16 or 17. Vibrance. I like colours in my photographs, so I like the colours to pop out. So my vibrance is generally added up a little bit, and the saturation as well, just a tad, just to add it up. Now, the last thing we're going to look at on this photograph is just the tone curve. Tone curves on this is just linear, and how that relates to the photograph. Well, if we look down here, you'll see the little button at the bottom says highlights. Well, this quarter here is highlights, this quarter here is the lights, this quarter here is the darks, and then the last one over on the right hand side is the shadows. And what we can do is we can either make the shadows darker, which you can see it moves this curve down, or we can make the highlights lighter, or we can make the highlights darker, of course. But what we'll do, if we reset that back to 0, what you'll hear talking about a lot in photography is the S-curve when you're editing photographs, because the S-curve just adds a little bit more contrast. So if I show you a very simple S-curve, take this up to 25, 23, 25, add this to 12, take that back to -12, take that to -25, and you'll see that we've created, sorry, -25, you'll see that we've created a very slight S-curve here, and it's added in some extra contrast. If we have a look, just turn that off and turn it back on again, you'll see it's added some extra contrast. So this is what the tone curve does. A tone curve adds in contrast. Now, an easy way to add in this contrast, rather than having to move these manually yourself, reset this back to 0 again, look, what we can do, point curve, and set strong contrast. If we set strong contrast there, you'll see that S curve has just come back in, and we've added that contrast in there. Okay. So that's the first photo, that's the first photograph that we've done. That is just basically getting it from that to that. So from a very flat image to something with a little bit more punch, a little bit more colour in it, and some more contrast. Okay, so the next photograph, this is a completely different kettle of fish. Now, there's a few rules that I broke on this. It was shot with my 70-300 at 1/50th of a second. Shot at 300mm, so that's a massive break of a rule. I shouldn't have been anywhere near 1/50th of a second for this. It was a bit of a candid one. I turned the camera around. I was playing with the lens, trying to get some close-ups of Alex. This is Alex. He's just finished his badminton match. Trying to get a close-up and didn't quite get the settings. One thing that this lens is not particularly good at is low light because of the variable aperture. So at 5.6, f5.6. the ISO needs to be quite high. It probably needs to be up again. Probably needs to be somewhere around 2000, and that obviously would have taken that up a stop as well. So it would have been 1/100th of a second then. So it might have been a little bit sharper. Not as much motion blur in the face, but nevertheless, see what we can get from this. So looking at the histogram, see it's over to the left-hand side. That means it's more than likely going to be underexposed. So we can see if we can push this histogram up to the right hand side to try and get some lighter tones into the image. So we can do that now. Let's just move this up a little bit. Probably just 3/4 of a stop, just to take it up a little bit. If we go too far, you'll see that we're starting to get a little bit of grain into it, and we also get this spike getting a little bit more pronounced. So let's just go 1 stop. So we'll go just over 1 stop up. That takes the histogram into the centre of our tone curve, tonal range, dynamic range. And if we have a look at our clipping range, if we turn that on, what we can do is just take these clipped highlights, just take them back using our recovery slider. It shouldn't take too much just to pull most of those back. I don't like to go over about 50 with this, so 42 will be good. Don't need to worry about the extremes. And right, so some blacks. We've got plenty of room to add some blacks in. If we add some blacks in, we'll start seeing some contrast come in the face as well. So if we just add some blacks in, just see that histogram really bulking out and being pulled back to the black side. And straight away that's looking like a pretty cool photo. Let's add some contrast in as well, really bulk up these blacks here and just see if we can add a little bit more detail into the lights. There we go, that's gone up to 38, that's looking pretty good. It's got some detail in the pinks and the greens down here. Clarity, well, it's a reasonably sharp image. Again, I don't want to be pulling back because it makes it go all dreamy and soft, so we're going to add it up again a little bit, my personal preference. And vibrance, let's just zoom out again. Vibrance is always good. I like colours to be showing on images most of the time. And our point curve. Now our point curve this time, I think there's definitely room for a strong contrast. Let's just go to a strong contrast. Should really make that image pop. And now you'll see it's flattened out, really stretched out this. So we're going to add in just another tiny bit. We've gone to 1 1/4 stops now, just a tiny bit. Now as we start getting up to 1 1/4 stops, maybe 1 1/2 stops, you start getting a little bit of noise and some grain into it, so this might be a perfect candidate actually for a black and white. So if we go black and white and then add the contrast right up, so you've got some really crisp difference between the blacks here and the whites, really stretch it out. And we can possibly even make this tone curve, the strong contrast tone curve, even sharper. So we're going to pull the shadows back, the darks back, push the lights up and push the highlights up, and then you'll see we've got a really nice crisp black and white image there. Black and white is always very good for things that are underexposed or things that you've had to shoot at high ISO, because to recover the image then you lose the image because it adds that drama because it's got that little bit of grain. Okay, so let's go on to the next image. We'll just show you the before and after again. There's before and cha-ching, there's our after. Nice crisp sharp black and white image. So here's our next one. Just have a quick drink. So while you have a look at those settings up there. So 1/400th of a second, f4.8 at 122mm. Again shot with my 70-300. And looking at the histogram here, this is looking pretty good, pretty stretched out. There's a lot of data down in the left hand side, which is, remember, over by the blacks and all the darker shades. So straight away from here we're going to add a bit of exposure. Just see if we can pull this histogram up into the centre. Now again, this is all about just looking at the histogram, and it gives you a hint about what might be the first step. So looking at the histogram here, we're going to add in some exposure. And as you start fiddling with these, I've added half a stop there. As you start fiddling, you'll start be able to looking at the photograph and saying, that's underexposed, I need to add a bit of exposure. But as a technical exercise, histogram, like I said, is a good place to start learning. Okay, so let's add in some blacks just to pull these blacks over to the right hand side because we've moved this exposure up, remember. So we've created space for that. We're going to add in a little bit of brightness. You'll see it just brings in a bit more detail up at the top. And some contrast as well. Now, contrast on this should be quite dramatic because it should really, you'll see there's a lot of data all the way through the dynamic range. So if we add some contrast, it should really bulk up this histogram and bulk up the image. So there you are. You see it's really bulking it up and really adding something to this image. Now, you see our highlight clippings has probably just gone a little bit excessive here. So if we just click them on, you'll see all these parts here are highlight clipped. That means they're pure white. Now we can use a recovery slider again just to save a bit of that data, bring back some of that data. So we're going to slide it up, but not too far, and we should see most of those going away relatively quickly. I don't like to go above 40 really with recovery. That should be about right. We're just getting the data back in here. I'm not worried about the bits up that are reflecting off the sun, so I don't need to worry about that too much. Scoot down here a little bit. Spin this bit around again. So clarity, I'm going to add that clarity. We're going to add the vibrance. Vibrance here. This is a good good example actually to demonstrate between vibrance and saturation. Vibrance will add in some of the more hidden colours, so some of the colours which aren't prominent to the, well, not prominent but not critical to the photograph. That will really bring those out. So if we push the vibrance up, then we get the blues and the greens really popping out on that. But if we use saturation, that's going to do every single colour in the image. So if we use that, you'll see the skin colour and everything else go really yucky. Okay, so saturation is something that should be used lightly unless you're after that kind of effect. So vibrance up should make these blues and the greens really pop out a little bit. Push that up quite a long way actually that time. We'll move the saturation as well. Tone curve, we've talked a lot about that, so we're just going to set that to strong contrast. Actually, let's set it to medium. Don't want to lose too much detail in this black area. Now, sharpening. We select this guy's face here. This would be a good example. What we're going to do is we're going to just sharpen his face. We're going to keep our eye on that. And we don't want to start seeing grain, so that's where we're getting grain. We don't want to, just want to sharpen some detail here, and then masking off. We don't want to add, we don't want to sharpen textures, and I'll show you why in the next photo. We just want to sharpen the edge detail, so I was holding down Alt there just to show what we were masking off, and then noise reduction is always nice to put in at least 10, because it doesn't really harm the image. Right, and lens correction. Lens correction is a funny one, and I've always, well, not always, but I've started to put it in a lot more because it clearly does something. Adobe wouldn't put this in if it wasn't beneficial. So if you click it on, you'll see it sorts out some distortion. It picks up what lens you've got. It clears some vignetting a little bit around the edge. So it definitely does something to the image, and therefore I always try to add it on. Okay, so that's that image done. We'll have a look at the before. Just turn off that highlight clipping. Have a look at the before. Very, very flat. You'll see that distortion coming in. And the after. There we go. So the last image, and this is actually one that was in the top 5 at the Frosin photo forum. So thank you very much for Jared for picking this. This is one of the photos which it's one of the photos which I was challenging myself just to try and get a little bit better with some portraits, because I always feel that when I go out and try and capture some portraits that weren't really that good. So this was one of the occasions where I pop up, was talking to Riley, well, not talking to him, but I was decided that he was going to be my subject for this week, and the theme was, what was the theme? Time waits for no one. So a little bit of a timeless idea, something about age. Riley's just got this jumper that my mum made, which adds him, just makes him a little bit grown up. And then I thought if I could get a thoughtful look on his face, which is easier said than done with a 20-month-old little boy, a little thoughtful look on his face, I thought that might make for quite a poignant photograph. So this is what we did. The window that I was using for the light, it's not very big, so I was actually crammed right up by the edge trying to take photos. I've only got a 50mm for portraits, I haven't got a 35mm, so I was crammed right up here trying to move Riley right over to the far side, and then basically all I was doing was asking him questions like, Riley, where's the grass? What's in the sky? Can you see the tree? What's in the tree? And I think this, this look on his face was simply just created by me asking him, Riley, look, what's in the tree? And he went like that. And there we go, snap, 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 and got the photo I wanted. Focusing on his eye here, you'll see it nice and crystal clear on his eye. ISO 500, 500th of a second at 1.8. If I was shooting it again, that would have been at ISO 200, which would have allowed me to drop that down to 250th of a second at 1.8. And then it would have just reduced this noise a little bit. But brilliant photo, very, very happy with it. And as I said, Jared picked it for a top 5, which I was very proud of. So what can we do with this? If we look at the histogram, it's pretty perfect, that is. That's pretty good. This is data all the way through the dynamic range. We're just missing a little bit of blacks out of here because we've got the light really flooding in, so there's not a lot of shadows, but we can certainly add that in. So here we go. Exposure doesn't need to be touched. Recovery doesn't need to be touched. Fill light doesn't need to be touched. Let's add the blacks in to start with then. Pull this histogram back to meet the black line here. I'm going to add in some contrast just to bulk up the shadows and the highlights. There we go, adding in that. I'm going to add some clarity again, personal preference. I'm going to add a little bit of vibrance just to bring out some of the colours. Tiny bit of saturation, vibrance, there we go. And I'm just going to keep an eye down here, look, we've got to be careful that this cyan peak here doesn't start getting clipped off, so I'll keep an eye on that when we go to medium contrast here. That's okay. And one thing we want to do now is show you about the sharpening. So sharpening, let's select his eye. So we're focused in on this left eye here, or right eye, sorry. Focusing on his right eye, we're going to select that bit there. We're going to sharpen so we can see a little bit more detail and crisp detail in his eyes and his hair. And we're going to mask off now. Now this is a perfect example of why we need to mask. Because at the moment, if I hold down my Alt key, you'll see it's actually sharpening the bokeh in the background, which we do not want at all. The bokeh is supposed to be nice and soft and dreamy, and we don't want to sharpen it, so we need to mask that off so it doesn't get sharpened. And you'll see the higher we go on this masking, the less and less, and then the more of the edge detail gets singled out. So we're going to just drop it at about 65, I would imagine. Oh no, we can go back down to around 60. There we go, so 60, and that's just sharpening just the edge detail, not all the differences around here in the bokeh. Okay. Add that little bit of noise reduction. I'm going to go probably a little bit further actually, so 15, 17. This is for ISO 500, and add that lens correction again. Let's see what difference it makes on the 51.8. Yep. So the vignetting takes lots of that vignetting out. And then this time, just because it's a portrait, let's use some post-crop vignetting this time. So very, very simply, this is a really simple one. We either want it dark or we want it light. And if we add it dark, we can then change the midpoint, so we can move the midpoint out or we can move the midpoint back in. And then we can change the roundness of it as well. We can either make it more round or less round. So I'm going to leave those where they were. Leave that where it was as well at 50. Just going to add a tiny little bit in the corners just to bring your focus in. And one thing I've been noticing once I have been doing this, it's just been darkening the image a bit too much. So if we go back up to the exposure, just want to add in a quarter of a stop or so of exposure just to bring that image back. And there we go, this was before. And then after looking at the histogram and using what we've learnt, that's the after. Okay, so hopefully guys that has added a little bit to your knowledge. You've enjoyed that, and get out there and try Lightroom. This is Lightroom 3.5. I believe Lightroom 4 is coming out very soon. It's in the beta at the moment, so it'll probably be about 8-9 months before that gets released. So recommendations, don't go out and buy Lightroom 3 or Lightroom 3.5, see if you can get a demo. And then obviously Photoshop Elements, that's also very, very good. You can get that quite cheaply. You can get that as a demo. The UI, the user interface, is very, very similar, but it's just in a different place. So rather than being able to scroll down all these, they're on tabs across the top. But all the sliders are there, I believe. I believe they're all there on Photoshop Elements, so you can do the exposure, you can do the recovery, you can do the contrast. Some of the things you might not be able to do, you might not be able to change the tone curve, and I don't think you can do the sharpening and the noise reduction as well. But definitely most of the sliders are there, and you can definitely get away with editing your photos in Photoshop Elements as well. So be interesting to hear what you think of this, guys, and I'd love to see some of your edits. If you do get a chance, export your original photo, export your edited photo and send them in to me. I'd love to see them. At the moment my email address is cfrosin, that's cfrosin@gmail.com. So I'd love to see those, and hopefully see you on. Take care, guys. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.